then we get into track 2, the 10-minute epic Tony Banks penned composition, One for the Vine. Again, just showing the adventurous nature of this album, throwing in another epic song as track 2. And this is a really cool song, guys. I mean, it starts off pretty mellow, pretty, kind of like a Genesis ballad, but very good lyrics, very good lyrical themes for Tony Banks. I mean, they explore themes of desertion, military desertion, how power corrupts people, all kinds of interesting things like that. And I love how the storyline really comes full circle at the end, where the protagonist of the song, who's like initially, kind of like deserting the army to avoid the oppression of, I guess, the overlords or whatever, he ends up becoming like worshipped as a god and having power just totally transform him. It's just really a really interesting like lyrical concept, and musically it's really great. I mean, it just starts off, as I mentioned before, kind of like a nice ballad, nothing special, but Phil Collins hits some pretty high notes, which is really cool, and some pretty emotional climaxes, especially when he starts singing the part that says, from the path prepared for him, all the oppressors. That I find that to be a really uplifting part. And then with the follow me, just some extremely high notes. It's kind of fitting for Phil Collins' vocal range, because I don't think Peter Gabriel would have been able to hit those notes. So definitely a song made for Phil Collins' vocals. And it really like winds down kind of like at the 5-minute mark, and when it's just really just Phil singing and Tony Banks's classical piano, and then out of nowhere, right when you think the song's just gonna be a ballad, holy shit, guys, this fucking transition comes in, and it's one of the weirdest and most unexpected transitions of all time. Right up there with Symptom of the Universe by Black Sabbath, which has one of my favorite transitions. But this transition is just so weird, so unexpected. And when I first heard it, I was thinking like, this is weird, because you have this beautiful ballad, and then all of a sudden all these weird sound effects come in, and it sounds like a freaking, honestly, it sounds like a factory. Like, it sounds really industrial with the doom 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 doom. It sounds like, very heavy, very industrial. And you got this cool Tony Banks driving kind of rhythm on the piano that builds and builds. And it kind of has even like a little bit of a disco vibe to it, which is pretty interesting shit. Anyway, a very jarring and very weird way to like, change up the song. And again, it's just very strange. You might not be into it at first, but over time, it really propels the song forward. And I would have liked for them to like really expand on it more, but really it just, after that part, it lasts about a minute. It just goes back to the original theme, but it ends off on a really strong note with the lyrics, as I mentioned, coming full circle. And there's some really cool like keyboard climaxes, really uplifting vocals. And it doesn't really feel like a 10-minute song. It feels much shorter. So that's always a good sign. And I really think it's one of the highlights of the album. Not like a top-tier Genesis epic, probably a second-tier Genesis epic. Like, it's not quite as good as Firth the Fifth, Supper's Ready, Musical Box, Stagnation. But I'd say it's on like the second tier. So it's not like the upper echelon, but still a really good song. Just a surprising thing about this song was that Steve Hackett, when I saw him play in 2018, I believe, February 2018. Yeah. At Massey Hall in Toronto, he decided to play this song from Wind and Wuthering, which is really interesting because, as I mentioned before, he really tried to pitch a lot of his own compositions for the album. And one of his best compositions actually got put on it, Blood on the Rooftops. And he decided to play this instead of Blood on the Rooftops. And I was shocked. I was like, holy shit, like, it's just a testament to how much of a great guy Steve Hackett is, that he's willing to play Tony Banks's composition just because like he recognizes it as a great song over his composition on the album. And I don't know, I found that really interesting. It was a really good performance too. But yeah, one for the Vine. I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. It's really strong. I would have liked it to explore that middle section a little more before going back to the original, which is the original theme, which is the only reason why I'm not giving it like a 9.5. But it's on the verge of a 9.5. But we'll keep it at a 9 for now.
Go far enough, you will reach a place where the sea runs underneath.
All right. So let's keep this into consideration. We're now about 17 minutes into the album. So already a huge chunk of the album went by, and we're only on track 3, which is pretty interesting. And this is what I was talking about, where the album kind of like goes a dip in quality in the middle. Again, the very strong first act of 11th Earl of Mar and One for the Vine is just top tier Genesis. And now we get into a couple songs that, could have done some trimming down, could have been replaced by other songs, and honestly kind of represent the low points on the album. And this lasts for about, I'd say, about 15 minutes. So yeah, the middle third of the album is the low point. And kicking it off, we got track 3, Your Own Special Way, which is a notoriously hated song by Genesis fans. And I could see where they're coming from. But I really think this song is nowhere near as bad as people make it out to be. Sure, it has some flaws that we'll get into, but it's not a horrible song at all. It's just, on the surface, it's just a love song written by Mike Rutherford. And, it's just a cheesy love song. But it's pretty good. I mean, the verses of the song, I have no problem with. I mean, the verses are great. They're really kind of like hypnotic, really, laid back verses. Phil Collins does a pretty good job, but it's the chorus where we run into problems. I mean, it's just over repeated. You have like a country kind of like guitar twang in the background, and it's just really strange. Like Genesis and country music don't really like mesh well together. And it's just, again, the chorus is over repeated. It's kind of like too too kind of like sweet, sugary sweet for Genesis. And I can see why a lot of like hardcore progressive rock fans, coming from like the King Crimson perspective, the Vandergraaf Generator fans would kind of like hate this song because it's just a love song. But again, I love the verses. It's just the chorus where we get into a few problems. And the song could have definitely been trimmed by a good 2 to 3 minutes. I mean, clocking in at 6 minutes, it's definitely way too long. And I think that's the main problem. It just takes up way too much space on the album. And like right when you think the song's going to get into something, like there's like this nice warm kind of synthesizer interlude in the middle. It just picks up like right where it started, like as if that part didn't even happen. So there really is no progression to the song. And like I wish it was just a bit shorter. I mean, it's just kind of repetitive, kind of overbearing. If this was like a 3-4 minute track, I would have had no problem with it. But at 6 minutes, it's kind of overstaying its welcome. But again, for the verses, I love the verses of the song. I'm still going to give it a 7.5 out of 10 because they're just so beautiful. And yeah, overall, I think it is underrated because it's not a horrible song like people make it out to be. But one point I will make is that they should have definitely have replaced this song with Inside and Out, which was a 6-minute Genesis song, which goes through way more variation, way more serious lyrical themes. They explore rape, like things that Genesis usually didn't touch on, way more, kind of like realistic themes on that song. And there's some great Steve Hackett guitar playing and keyboard work at the end. And it's a shame that it just ended up on a forgotten EP rather than on Wind and Wuthering. And I think if they had replaced this song with Inside and Out, it would have been a fantastic album. Like, it would have been much better than the album turned out to be, which is still a great album. So let's just get that out of the way. And I had mentioned seeing Steve Hackett back in 2018 live in Toronto, and he did play Inside and Out. So I guess that was, if you consider that part of the Wind and Wuthering era, that he did play another song from Wind and Wuthering. But yeah, instead we get Your Own Special Way. So I guess, it's Mike Rutherford's only composition on the album. So I guess as a democratic process, they had to give him his song. So can't really complain about that. So yeah, Your Own Special Way. Comment below Let me know what you think about it. Is it as horrible as everyone says it is, or is it just a little overlong, a little repetitive, like my opinion? Let me know. Coming in at track 4, we got one of the most bizarre Genesis song titles, Wot Gorilla, with a question mark, which is basically just Phil Collins' jazz fusion-y thing. I think he was just trying to, kind of just replicate Los Endos, but unlike Los Endos, this song's just not as great. I mean, it just sticks to the same theme for like the majority of the song, and it just has this extremely overbearing synthesizer work by Tony Banks that's just kind of just repetitive and doesn't really go anywhere, and it's just kind of annoying, to be honest. And it's just, I guess Phil Collins really fought to get this song on the album because we all know Phil Collins was heavily into jazz fusion style drumming, like with his past work with Genesis, like on Dancing with the Moonlit Night, Los Endos, as I mentioned, and especially his work with his band Brand X. But I don't know. I just feel like this is kind of like the weaker jazz fusion moment of Genesis. It's just kind of repetitive, and Phil Collins did really love the song, but I really think they should have replaced this song with Steve Hackett's track "Please Don't Touch," which would later appear on his solo album, as I mentioned. It's just a much stronger track, and I think they were fucking crazy to kind of reject that song in favor of Wot Gorilla, because it's just really not, not the best song. It's just way too repetitive. Right when it starts getting interesting, it kind of just goes back to the original theme. The and it just repeats that like keyboard motif over and over again. And there's all these like high pitched kind of like whistling sounds. Kind of reminds me of Bob Dylan's Highway 61 Revisited. So just I love that song, but the whistles are kind of annoying. Anyway. Wot Gorilla, it's just another weaker point on the album. Definitely should have been replaced with Steve Hackett's Please Don't Touch. And I will say the drumming is fantastic, so I'm still going to be giving it a pretty generous 7 out of 10. Because the drumming is really great. And I guess they were kind of working as they had to make a few compromises, so Phil Collins really wanted this on the album, so they kind of appeased him by letting him do it. But yeah, it's definitely the weaker link on the album. So probably the worst track. And again, it's not horrible, but it definitely, I don't know. I can go without it. So that's just my opinion.
It only took one blow.
Coming in at track 5, we got another Tony Banks kind of like solo composition with All in a Mouse's Night. And I have some really mixed feelings on this song, in the sense that like the last 2.5 minutes of this song are just ridiculously amazing, but the first 4.5 minutes it's kind of like a balance between a few pros and cons. I mean, it's just kind of middle of the road Genesis music, but the last 2.5 minutes, oh my fucking god, are just ridiculously amazing. And I guess let's just start talking about the first 4.5 minutes. I mean, basically the first 4.5 minutes, it kind of just focuses on like the lyrical themes of the song, which have to do with like kind of this like playful kind of fairy tale kind of storyline where it shifts perspective between this mouse kind of like stalking the house and this couple, I guess this like romantic couple. And kind of just shifts perspective between these two people, just following the storyline of this mouse just kind of like sneaking around the house. So it's kind of a cool concept, a little bit kind of like juvenile fairy tale kind of stuff, but it's not bad. So concept-wise, it's okay. Lyrically, it's a little cheesy. I mean, just, again, I mentioned like the song kind of shifts perspective between the couples and the mouse. And I really find that the sections where Phil Collins is singing from the mouse's perspective to be pretty cool. I mean, like these sections have like this cool like prowling kind of feel to them, where like you could kind of get into the role of the mouse, kind of like trying to sneak throughout the house. But then when it gets to the couple section, I don't know, like it's kind of cheesy. The vocals don't kind of work. Again, it's kind of, I don't know, kind of takes you out of the song, but not the best Genesis, but definitely during the mouse perspective sections, it's pretty cool. And I really like how Phil Collins didn't really attempt to like, use an exaggerated voice to kind of describe like the different perspectives in the song. That's pretty cool, Like I guess he learned from Robbery, Assault, and Battery that it just comes across as a cheap Peter Gabriel kind of knockoff. And I'm glad that he kind of learned from that and put his unique spin on both perspectives of the song. But yeah, that's the first 4.5 minutes. They're not bad. Like they're pretty enjoyable. It's got this cool organ riff. It's just pretty standard Genesis fare by this point. But let me tell you guys, the second 2.5 minutes are incredible. I mean, Steve Hackett just comes out of nowhere with one of his most emotional, one of his most, honestly, like just one of his greatest moments. And it just comes out of nowhere on such an unexpected song. And I just can't help but feel that this like emotional climax was kind of wasted, because it feels like this song, this climax should have been tacked onto a song with a lot more emotional resonance, rather than just like, a throwaway track about like a mouse and a romantic couple, kind of like the interplay between them. I feel like it kind of loses its emotional resonance. Like if you listen to this part in isolation, it's fantastic. But like tacked on to the end of All in a Mouse's Night, it's not satisfying enough for me. Like although it is amazing, it just kind of loses its emotional resonance. And it kind of just like highlights the point that like lyrics really do matter. I mean, if you have a song with like such trivial lyrics, such playful lyrics, and then like tack on this like incredible emotional outro to it, it just loses its luster basically. So yeah, All in a Mouse's Night. It's a bipolar song, just like Robbery, Assault, and Battery. And I don't know what to give it. Maybe like, I don't know, I would give the outro like a 9 out of 10 or a 9.5, but I'd give the rest of the song like a 7.5. So I'm just going to meet halfway and just give it like an 8 out of 10. I think that's pretty fair. So yeah, that's All in a Mouse's Night.
Blood on the rooftops, Venice in the spring, streets of San Francisco, word from Peking.
Alright guys, here it is. I'm just gonna come out and say it. Track 7 on the album, Blood on the Rooftops, is my favorite song post Peter Gabriel. My favorite Genesis song, that is. And it's honestly incredible. It's by far the best song on the album. Honestly, by far the best post Peter Gabriel Genesis song. Just everything about it is genius. I honestly, I get emotional every single time I listen to it. And I've been listening to it for a good like 8 years now, and it just never gets old. It's just beyond incredible, beyond fantastic. And it's just Steve Hackett's crowning moment as a songwriter. I mean, this was Steve Hackett's like main contribution to the album. He came up with the main melody, the main riff, and Phil Collins actually came out with the chorus of the song, which is a big component of Blood on the Rooftops. I mean, the chorus is really what kind of elevates the song. So I feel like Phil Collins should get like a lot of credit for this song as well. It's just, oh my God, guys. I mean, that acoustic guitar intro. It just starts off with Steve Hackett just playing the most intricate, the most progressive, classical acoustic guitar intro you can ever imagine. It's just, it never stays in one spot at the same time. It's just constantly changing, but it always keeps your attention. It's just one of the greatest intros of all time. Really, of all time. And then finally when it locks into that groove, the ding 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 ding, that part there is just mind-blowing. And then Phil Collins comes in and the song is just, it's just so dark, so melancholic, basically lyrics about like watching the news and just seeing all the depressing shit going on. And it's just a really mature song for Genesis. And I think that was I think that was Steve Hackett's intention actually, because he had seen the lyrics of the album. You know, he'd seen 11th Earl of Mar, All in a Mouse's Night, things like that, and he just kind of felt like the album needed a bit more realism to it. And he definitely contributed that with Blood on the Rooftops. It's just it explores some very like modern, very realistic themes, and it's just fucking amazing. I mean, Phil Collins. Okay, I talked about Steve Hackett's incredible acoustic playing, but Phil Collins during that chorus is probably the greatest Phil Collins vocal moment of all time. Either that or Afterglow, which is later on the album. And it's just, man, I just melt every single time I hear that chorus. I mean, it's just so passionate. It gets so intense the way it builds up. And oh my god, I mean, you got like the Mellotron in the background, this heavy riff just kind of like pounding through, and it just reaches like emotional heights that I can't even comprehend. So honestly, Blood on the Rooftops, definitely the best song on the album. 10 out of 10 easily. I mean, this is like a top 15 Genesis song right here, in my opinion. And the thing is, I don't think it really like hits you hard the first time you listen to it. But over the years, it's just one of the Genesis songs that sticks with you the longest. So yeah, Blood on the Rooftops, fucking incredible. I don't know what else to say about it. Thank God they let Steve Hackett put this song on the album, because if they didn't let him put this song on the album and replaced it with something else, then that would have been a fucking damn shame. So yeah, 10 out of 10, masterpiece. Listen to it right now and just bask in the glory. Now we get to something really special, guys. Unquiet, Slumbers for the Sleepers, and In That Quiet Earth. The two-part instrumental extravaganza on Wind and Wuthering. And this is just fucking phenomenal, guys. I mean, the run from Blood on the Rooftops to the end of the album is basically unmatched. I mean, Trick of the Tail has some really, really high points, like Ripples and Dance on a Volcano. But I think that this run of the album, the last third of this album, is right up there with like the Peter Gabriel era. It's just incredible. And I mean, just starting off with Unquiet, Slumbers for the Sleepers, it's just one of the most atmospheric instrumentals Genesis ever came up with. Kind of reminiscent of Ravine from The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, with its like dark, windy atmosphere and like jangling guitar, but it's just taken to the next level. And it's just so atmospheric, so beautiful. I mean, you look at that album cover and you listen to that song, and it's literally the perfect match. It's like the perfect musical representation of winter. And it's just incredible how Genesis can really like, you know, use their instrumentation to kind of evoke all those emotions. And I mean, it's just listening to Wind and Wuthering in the wintertime, just staring out into like the landscape. I'm from Canada, so we get some pretty harsh winters, and just it always seems to be a blizzard when I'm listening to Wind and Wuthering. Like, I'm always in the mood to listen to this album on like a cold and wintry day, and it just fits the mood so perfectly, especially with Unquiet, Slumbers for the Sleepers. And then In That Quiet Earth just leads in from that, and it's just one of the most progressive sounding and classic Genesis instrumentals. I mean, you got Steve Hackett's just hypnotic riffs just throughout the entire song, and this incredible jazz fusion drumming from Phil Collins, some crazy synthesizer shit from Tony Banks, and it has this awesome melody to it. There's even like backwards guitar playing, all kinds of crazy shit. I mean, Steve Hackett is just letting his imagination run wild on this song. And then before you even know it, bam! Just like Fly on the Windshield, we get one of the craziest Genesis transitions of all time. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, you get this heavy riff coming in, and just, Oh my god, it just sounds so epic, so Middle Eastern, so in your face. And then you get Tony Banks doing all this crazy keyboard wizardry, kind of like reminiscent of Riding the Scree from The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And just all hell breaks loose. And it's just so intense. One of the most intense Genesis instrumentals. And it's just freaking ridiculously amazing. Like, I can't even describe how great it is. And then the song ends and it just fades perfectly into the next song, Afterglow. And it's just one of the major highlights of the album, one of the major highlights of post Peter Gabriel Genesis. And it never gets old. I mean, just that transition and In That Quiet Earth. If you know Genesis, you know what I'm talking about. It's a freaking masterpiece. Now, overall, as a song, this technically is two separate tracks, Unquiet Slumbers and In That Quiet Earth, but I'm going to combine them as one and give it a really strong 9.5 out of 10 because it's just, the intro is so atmospheric and then it gets so intense and it's just one of their most just balls to the wall, no bars held, progressive rock gems. So just another fantastic song coming in at the later part of this album. So if you were noticing the dip in quality in the middle of this thing, don't give up yet because it finishes off on a bang, let me tell you. Closing off the album on an incredible high note, we have the track Afterglow, one of the most prolific Genesis songs. I mean, they played this shit at every single concert, and for good reason. It's just so anthemic, so passionate, so emotional, and just one of the simplest Genesis songs. I mean, Tony Banks himself even says he thought he had rewritten Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, and then he re-listened to it and he's like, okay, there's a few differences. You know, I can get this by without getting sued by whoever the hell wrote that song. But in essence, it's a very simple Genesis song. It really doesn't go through many changes, and yet it's just so incredibly emotional, so evocative. And we really owe all that to Phil Collins' just stellar performance on this song. I mean, on this song here, he really came into his own as a vocalist, just putting in every single ounce of emotion he possibly had in those pipes into the song, and it keeps reaching climax over after climax after climax and never really lets down the entire way. And I mean, again, it's just such a simple Genesis song, and I feel like a lot of the progressive rock fans kind of undersell this song, but it's just man, it's just so daring. Like they go that extra mile to bring you that emotion during this song, and it's just such an incredible way to end the album. Definitely one of the major highlights of post Peter Gabriel era Genesis, and just really solidifying Wind and Wuthering is like one of the greatest Genesis albums after Peter Gabriel. I mean, like right after that dip in quality in the middle, the last third of this album is just spellbinding, incredible, like every superlative I could possibly come up. But yeah, it's just so great. And it's just incredible how Tony Banks wrote this song. This is another Tony Banks solo composition. And he says he wrote the song in about the same amount of time it takes to play it, which is just a huge stroke of genius. So yeah, definitely not an overrated Genesis song, and might even be underrated despite all the amount of times the band played the song on tour. So it's just such a great way to close the album. And that's Wind and Wuthering. It's just, honestly, it's a great album. It's a mixed bag. You know, as I mentioned, it has a really strong first third, the really strong second third, and some parts in the middle that, aren't up to scratch with the previous works of Genesis, but overall aren't bad. And, they do have their redeeming moments, like on All in a Mouse's Night, the last 2 minutes of that. And, even, the drumming on Wot Gorilla, and the verses on Your Own Special Way. So it does have its redeeming qualities. So don't get me wrong, it's still great, even in the middle of the album. So another really strong effort from Genesis. And wow, what an album. What an atmospheric album. And as I mentioned before, it's heavy with the Tony Banks synthesizer, but Steve Hackett still shines through at a lot of crucial moments, especially the obviously Blood on the Rooftops. But again, those instrumentals at the end have some of the greatest Steve Hackett guitar work. So another great effort by Genesis. So thanks so much again for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. And in the next video, we're going to be tackling And Then There Were Three, which it's a pretty controversial album, but I really dig it. I really dig it, guys. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and take it easy.